I thought moving into my new home would be a fresh start, until the HOA president, Karen, decided she wanted me out. She fined me, harassed me, and even tried to evict me. But there was just one problem. She had no idea I owned her house. And when she found out, oh, it was glorious. Stay tuned, because this is the most satisfying revenge you'll ever hear. The moment I pulled into the driveway of my new home, I knew I had made it. A charming, tree-lined street, well-manicured lawns, and houses that looked straight out of a brochure. It was the American dream, right? Wrong. I was unloading my last box when I heard it, the unmistakable click-clack of high heels on pavement, approaching fast. I turned to see a woman striding toward me with the confidence of a corporate CEO and the expression of someone who had just smelled something rotten. She was in her 50s, platinum blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and a cardigan draped over her shoulders like she was about to make an important speech at a country club. "Excuse me," she said, her voice teetering between polite and condescending. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Karen, president of the HOA. Ah, so it begins." I wiped my hands on my jeans and forced a smile. "Nice to meet you. I'm Jake. Just moved in." Karen scanned me up and down, assessing. Then she sighed like I had already disappointed her. "I see. Well, I wanted to welcome you, but also go over a few important community guidelines." She pulled out a folder. A full-on binder of laminated rules, neatly tabbed and color-coded. I blinked. "You carry that around?" She ignored me and flipped to a section labeled Prohibited Activities in bold red letters. "For instance, I noticed your moving truck was parked on the street for over an hour. That's against HOA regulations." I glanced at the truck, which was currently in my driveway. "Ah, I think you mean when I was unloading earlier?" She pursed her lips. "Yes, and next time I suggest you move faster. Also, I assume you'll be repainting that front door." I looked at my door. It was blue. A perfectly normal blue. "Why would I repaint it?" She gave a tight-lipped smile, the kind you give a child who just spilled juice on your expensive carpet. "All doors must be in approved neutral colors. This shade isn't on the list." I stared at her. She stared back. "You have a list for door colors?" She nodded solemnly. I exhaled. "Of course you do." Karen took a step closer. "Now, I understand you're new, but I strongly suggest reading through the HOA guidelines. We have strict policies, and I'd hate for you to start accumulating violations right away." That sounded a lot like a threat, but I kept my face neutral. "I'll take a look." She nodded, clearly pleased with herself, then turned on her heel and strutted away. I watched her disappear down the street, shaking my head. I had lived here for 10 minutes, and I was already on Karen's watch list. Perfect. That night, I was sitting in my living room, trying to enjoy a beer when I noticed something strange. The lights flickered. At first, I figured it was just bad wiring, but then it happened again. And again. The lamp by the couch went out completely, only to flicker back on a moment later. "Great," I muttered. "Faulty electrical." I pulled out my phone and Googled electricians in the area. But just as I was about to make a call, I heard a faint buzzing noise from outside. Curious, I walked to the window and peeked out. That's when I noticed it. Every house on the street had full, bright lighting. Mine was the only one dimming like a haunted house. Weird. I stepped outside to check the breaker box when I spotted my next-door neighbor, an older guy watering his lawn. "Hey, quick question," I called out. "Have you had any electrical issues lately?" He frowned. "Nope, everything's been fine." "Why?" I explained the flickering lights, and his face immediately darkened. "You should talk to Ted," he said, nodding toward a house down the street. "He's the HOA treasurer. If there's an issue, he'd know." I thanked him and made my way over. Ted was a lanky man in his 60s, wearing cargo shorts and socks with sandals. He greeted me with a friendly nod when he answered the door. "New guy, right? What can I do for you?" I told him about the electricity issue, expecting him to say something about old wiring or the neighborhood grid. Instead, he frowned. "That's strange." "Yeah, tell me about it," I said. "It's like my house is the only one affected." Ted scratched his chin. "You didn't upset anyone, did you?" I hesitated. "Define upset." He sighed. "Listen, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but Karen has been known to mess with people she doesn't like." I raised an eyebrow. "Mess with them how?" He leaned in. "She has connections with the utility company. HOA oversight and all that. A few years back, a guy refused to mow his lawn to HOA standards, and suddenly, His water pressure mysteriously dropped for weeks. Another time, a family painted their house the wrong shade of beige. Next thing they knew, their power kept cutting out at night. I blinked. Are you saying Karen is tampering with my electricity? Ted shrugged. I'm just saying, it wouldn't be the first time. I let out a slow breath, my irritation turning into something sharper. This woman had already given me grief over nonsense rules. Now she was messing with my utilities? If she thought she could intimidate me into submission, she was dead wrong. Thanks for the info, Ted, I said. I think I need to have another chat with our dear HOA president. Ted gave me a look of sympathy. Good luck. You'll need it. I walked back to my house, my mind racing. Karen had come at me swinging, assuming she could push me around like the rest of the neighborhood. But she didn't know one very important detail. A detail that was going to turn this entire situation on its head. She didn't know I owned her house. The next morning, I woke up to something worse than flickering lights. Asterisk, asterisk, a fine taped to my front door. Asterisk, asterisk. I yanked the paper off and skimmed the text. Violation notice. Failure to maintain lawn per HOA standards, $250 fine. I blinked. Then I looked at my lawn. It was perfectly mowed. Oh, Karen. I gritted my teeth and marched down the street toward her house, my shoes crunching against the pavement. If she thought she could intimidate me with bogus fines, she was in for a very rude awakening. Her house was exactly what you'd expect. Pristine white siding, symmetrical hedges, an American flag hanging perfectly from a polished brass mount. It was the kind of house that screamed, I have too much time on my hands and not enough personality to compensate. I knocked sharply. A few seconds later, Karen opened the door, already looking annoyed. Oh, she said flatly. It's you. I held up the fine. Care to explain this? Karen crossed her arms. Your grass is too tall. I let out a sharp laugh. Too tall? It's barely an inch over whatever arbitrary number you made up. She shrugged, unimpressed. The rules exist for a reason. If we let one person ignore them, soon the whole neighborhood will be overgrown. I narrowed my eyes. You know this is ridiculous, right? She gave me a saccharine smile. Ridiculous would be ignoring HOA policies. If you don't like it, you're always welcome to find another neighborhood. I inhaled deeply, reining in my growing frustration. Speaking of things that are actually ridiculous, any idea why my house is the only one with electrical issues? Karen's expression barely flickered, but I caught it, a split-second pause, just enough to confirm she knew something. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said smoothly. Really? Because I heard you have a history of causing problems for people who don't fall in line. She stiffened. That's a very serious accusation. So is threatening someone with eviction when you have no actual power to do so? Karen scoffed. You're being paranoid. If there's an issue, call the utility company. Already did, I lied. They're sending someone out to check the records. Should be interesting to see if there were any manual adjustments to my service. Karen's smile thinned. Well, I wish you luck with that. Her tone was clipped, and before I could say anything else, she shut the door in my face. I stood there for a long moment, gripping the bogus fine so tightly it crumpled in my hand. This wasn't just about me mowing my lawn or following her precious rulebook. Karen was trying to push me out, and I had no doubt she'd keep escalating if I didn't do something about it. Fine. If she wanted to play dirty, so could I. That night, the flickering lights continued. Every few minutes, my living room dimmed like I was in the middle of a lightning storm. I was done playing along. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, determined to figure out exactly what was going on. The air was cool, the street eerily quiet. Most houses had their lights on, a warm glow spilling from their windows. Mine? It looked like the set of a horror movie. I walked around to the side of my house, toward the breaker box. As I reached for it, I noticed something weird. Asterisk, asterisk, a second wire running from the meter. Asterisk, asterisk. Frowning, I traced it along the ground. It stretched across my yard through the bushes and directly into Karen's property. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. I crouched down, running my fingers over the cable. It looked new, as if someone had deliberately tampered with the electrical line. A slow, satisfied smirk spread across my face. Karen had overplayed her hand. The next morning, I made some calls. By noon, an electrician arrived to inspect the wiring. I watched as he examined the setup, his brows furrowing. This is definitely unauthorized, he muttered. Looks like someone installed an illegal switch to control your power flow remotely. I nodded like I wasn't seething inside. Can you prove it was tampered with? Oh yeah, he said. And the best part? If this was done by someone without permission, they're in serious violation of both state regulations and HOA policies. I grinned. Perfect. I'd like that in writing. That afternoon, I took the electrician's report straight to the HOA board. Karen didn't look pleased to see me at the emergency meeting. She sat at the head of the table, arms crossed, surrounded by the other board members, Ted among them. He gave me a barely hidden smirk, clearly enjoying whatever was about to happen. What's this about? Karen said, exasperated. I have things to do. I set the electrician's report on the table. I'd like to discuss why my power was being manually manipulated from your property. The room went silent. Karen's face didn't just pale, it drained of all color. That's absurd, she snapped. I had nothing to do with. The report says otherwise. I slid the document closer. Unless you'd like to explain why an illegal switch was installed, conveniently allowing my power to be tampered with from your house? The other board members whispered among themselves. Ted leaned forward, frowning. Karen, is this true? Karen's lips thinned. Of course not. This is clearly a misunderstanding. I leaned back, crossing my arms. Oh, because the state utility board might not see it that way. Her eyes widened slightly. I kept going. Yeah, I already sent them a copy of the report. Apparently, tampering with someone else's electricity is highly illegal. Karen's composure cracked. You can't just accuse me of something like this. Oh, I'm not accusing. I smiled. I'm proving. She opened her mouth, then closed it, realizing she was cornered. Ted looked at her, disappointed. Karen, this is bad. The HOA can't protect you if you've been breaking the law. Karen glared at me. You don't belong here. I shrugged. That's funny, because I own a house here. She shot up from her chair, fists clenched. Well, I'll find a way to remove you. You'll see. I laughed. Good luck with that. Because what Karen still didn't know. She wasn't just harassing a homeowner. She was trying to evict the landlord of her own house. And that was going to be so much fun to reveal. Karen was furious. I could see it in the way her hands clenched the edges of the table, in the way her nostrils flared as she inhaled sharply through her nose, like a bull about to charge. She had spent years terrorizing this neighborhood, ruling the HOA like a self-appointed queen. And now, for the first time, someone had the nerve to challenge her. I had more than just nerve. I had leverage. The HOA board members were still murmuring among themselves when Karen abruptly stood, her chair scraping against the floor. This is a waste of time, she snapped. Clearly, this newcomer doesn't understand how our community works. I gave her an easy smile. Oh, I understand perfectly. Rules for thee, but not for thee. That's how this works, right? Her eyes narrowed into slits. Ted cleared his throat. Karen, we can't just ignore this. If you tampered with a homeowner's electricity, that's... I did no such thing, she snapped. Then, realizing she sounded defensive, she forced a sickly sweet smile. This is all just a misunderstanding. I would never intentionally cause harm to a resident. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. You sure about that? I turned the device so the board could see the video footage I had taken earlier that morning. Clear as day, Karen's landscaper digging up the cables near my breaker box, adjusting something before carefully covering it back up. One of the board members, an older woman with glasses, let out a sharp gasp. Karen, is that your landscaper? Karen's expression flickered between panic and fury. That doesn't prove anything. He could have been fixing something. Yeah, I said, playing dumb. Because I definitely believe your landscaper just happened to be performing electrical work on a house that isn't yours. Ted sighed and rubbed his temple. Karen, this is bad. Karen turned on me, her mask slipping entirely. I knew you were going to be trouble the moment you moved in, she hissed. People like you ruin communities. That made me laugh. Oh, people like me? Defiant. Disrespectful. Think you can ignore rules just because you don't like them. I crossed my arms. And what rules have I broken exactly? She opened her mouth, then shut it, realizing she had no real argument. Another board member, a balding man in his 70s, sighed. I think we need to call a formal vote on whether or not Karen's actions warrant disciplinary action. Karen gasped, like the very thought of being held accountable was physically painful. Disciplinary action? Against me? HOA rules apply to everyone, Karen, Ted said, looking tired. I knew then and there that Karen's grip on the HOA was slipping. But I wasn't done yet. Before we start voting, I said, casually leaning back, I actually have a little announcement to make. Karen glared. What now? I smiled. It's about your house. A flicker of something crossed her face, confusion. Then irritation. What about it? I pulled out a thick envelope and slid it across the table toward her. This, I said, is your new lease agreement. Silence. Karen didn't reach for the envelope. She just stared at it, her face blank. What is this nonsense? She finally bit out. I clasped my hands together. Well, funny thing. When I bought my house, I didn't realize it was part of a larger real estate investment deal. Turns out, the seller I purchased from didn't just own my property. He owned several in this neighborhood. And one of those houses, I gestured toward her, was yours. Dead. Silence. Karen's expression flickered through a series of emotions: shock, disbelief, rage, panic. I let the words sink in before adding, asterisk legally, asterisk you're not a homeowner, Karen. You're a tenant, and lucky for you, I'm a very hands-on landlord. The entire board looked at her in stunned silence. Ted, barely holding back a smirk, leaned forward. Is this true, Karen? Karen grabbed the envelope and ripped it open, her eyes scanning the official property transfer documents. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, her face turning an impressive shade of red. This is a mistake, she sputtered. I grinned. No mistake. You've been renting from the previous owner under an HOA exemption rule that lets non-homeowners serve on the board if they appear to be property owners. Since you had a long-term lease, nobody questioned it. But now your lease is expired. The older woman on the board blinked. Wait, so Karen isn't actually a homeowner? Correct, I said. And since I'm the new owner, I decide whether or not to renew her lease. All eyes turned to Karen. She was seething. You can't evict me, she spat. I have rights. I shrugged. Sure do. But your lease was month to month, and I've decided not to renew it. So you've got 30 days to move out. Or if you'd rather, I can start the eviction process right now. Karen exploded. You can't do this, she screeched, slamming her hands on the table. I am the HOA president. This is MY neighborhood. Ted, now grinning openly, adjusted his glasses. Actually, it sounds like it's Jake's neighborhood now. Karen whipped toward him, but the rest of the board was nodding in agreement. Karen, the elderly board member said gently, if you're not a homeowner, you can't serve as HOA president. Her jaw dropped. Asterisk what? Asterisk. Ted shrugged. Rules are rules. We'll need to vote on a new president immediately. Her eye twitched. You can't just replace me. Sure we can, I said cheerfully. That's what happens when you lose everything. I stood, taking in the sight of Karen, completely powerless for the first time in years. You have 30 days, I reminded her. Better start packing. Then I turned and walked out, relishing every second of the furious shriek that echoed behind me. The next few weeks were pure bliss. Without Karen barking orders at everyone, the neighborhood underwent a transformation. The atmosphere felt lighter, conversations at the mailbox lasted longer, and for the first time, neighbors weren't afraid to enjoy their own yards. I even saw kids riding their bikes down the street, a sight that had apparently been forbidden under Karen's reign. As for Karen herself, she was not taking it well. Every time I saw her, she was seething. She'd march around, barking at the few remaining HOA loyalists, desperately trying to cling to power. She even attempted to issue fake violation notices, which I promptly shredded and sent back to her mailbox with a smiley face drawn on them. Then came the day I had been waiting for, the final showdown. On the morning of her eviction deadline, I stood outside my house, sipping coffee and enjoying the crisp air. Across the street, Karen's driveway was a war zone. She had refused to pack until the last possible minute, and now, her belongings were being haphazardly shoved into a moving truck by two exhausted-looking movers. Her once pristine lawn was now littered with boxes, furniture, and an ungodly amount of decorative throw pillows. I watched as she screeched at the movers. Be careful with that, you imbecile. That mirror is worth more than your entire life. One of the movers sighed audibly and threw a heavy box into the truck with a little extra force. I grinned. Then, as if sensing my joy, Karen's head snapped toward me. Our eyes met, and that's when she made a fatal mistake. Instead of admitting defeat with an ounce of dignity, she marched right over. Showtime. She stopped just short of stepping onto my lawn, arms crossed, face twisted with barely contained rage. I hope you're happy. I took a slow sip of coffee. Oh, I am. Very. Karen's eye twitched. You have no idea what you've done. This neighborhood is going to fall apart without me. I pretended to think. You mean without someone fining people for using the wrong shade of beige on their houses? Or for leaving their trash cans out 5 minutes too long? Yeah, total chaos. She scowled. I made this neighborhood perfect, and now it's ruined. Just wait, you'll regret this. I tilted my head. That's funny, because from where I'm standing, the only one with regrets is you. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Then, just when I thought she was about to storm away, she threw out one final, pathetic threat. You think this is over? She hissed. I have friends in real estate. I'll buy a house back in this neighborhood, and when I do, I'm going to make your life miserable. I fought back a grin. Oh, Karen. I had been waiting for this moment. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough to let the suspense build. That's going to be difficult. Her brows furrowed. What are you talking about? I pulled my phone from my pocket and casually scrolled to a saved web page. Then, with a flick of my thumb, I turned the screen to face her. She froze. Her face drained of color. On my screen was a real estate listing, but not just any listing. Every available house in the neighborhood had already been purchased. By me. You, she whispered, her voice shaking. You bought them all. I smiled. Yeah. Funny thing about being a landlord, Karen, you start to learn a few tricks. Karen's jaw moved, but no words came out. She looked like she was glitching. I pressed forward, relishing every second. See, after I realized how miserable you made this place, I started looking into properties. Turns out, a lot of people wanted out, especially when they found out you were no longer running the HOA. I shrugged. So, I made them offers. Good ones. Karen's fists clenched. You you can't do this. Oh, but I did. I grinned. And since I own most of the available housing now, it's going to be very hard for you to move back in. Her breathing was erratic. She looked like she was about to explode. I took one step closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. Oh, and Karen? She stiffened. I leaned in, enjoying the final cherry on top. Even if you somehow found a way back in? I smiled. You'd still have to apply. Karen blinked. Apply? I nodded, keeping my voice delightfully smug. I control most of the properties here now. And you know what that means. I tapped my chin, pretending to think. Oh, right. That means I get to pick my tenants. The realization hit her like a freight train. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. It was glorious. She had spent years deciding who was and wasn't good enough for this neighborhood. She had abused her power, tormented people, made them feel small. And now? She wasn't just losing her house. She was losing everything. And there wasn't a single thing she could do about it. Karen let out a strangled noise, a mix between a scream and a gasp, then turned on her heel and stormed away. I watched her go, taking a long sip of my coffee, enjoying every second of her meltdown. 1 month later, the neighborhood was thriving. With Karen gone, people actually enjoyed living here. The HOA, now under Ted's leadership, had reduced fees, gotten rid of the ridiculous restrictions, and even organized a neighborhood barbecue. And as for Karen, last I heard, she was struggling to find a place. Apparently, she had burned too many bridges, and no one wanted to rent to her. Poetic justice at its finest. As I stood on my front porch, looking out at my happy, peaceful neighborhood, I smiled to myself. I had moved in expecting a fresh start. Instead, I got revenge. And it was absolutely delicious.